right, welcome everyone to Grazing Horizons. This is AgriProve's new Podinar Series, part podcast, part webinar, all signal, no noise. My name is Matthew Warnken. I'm founder and chair of AgriProve. And today I'll be your host as we'll tackle some of the biggest, most consequential questions in Australian agriculture. At Grazing Horizons, we're interested in creating the space to discuss how agriculture sees itself, specifically by looking at farming and grazing through the lens of soil and carbon, not as abstract philosophical concepts, but as practical management tools that can materially improve long-term sustainability, lift productivity, and ultimately drive profitability for producers and growers. Now, we're broadcasting today from the newly renovated AgriProve soundstage in Albury on Wiradjuri country. And I'd like to call out and pay our respects to all First Nations people, especially in their role of original innovators in agricultural systems, where by necessity, ecology was integrated as a foundation of the day-to-day economy. And certainly at Grazing Horizons, we will be drawing on that need for understanding of country and getting those ecological insights for better management to make progress in sustainability, productivity, and profitability. Now, today is a milestone moment for us at AgriProve, launching Grazing Horizons, and we're super excited to have as our inaugural guest someone whose life and work sits squarely at that intersection of land, of culture, systems thinking, and innovation. Hobbs Magaret.
I'm gonna have to put that on my.
That's a good one. You like that one?
Yeah, that's my new LinkedIn headline.
No, you got it. The royalty fees do do apply. Hobbs Magaret in with me at the AgriProve soundstage, seventh generation Texas rancher, musician, prolific social media content creator with a global following, master of ecological adaptive grazing, author, raconteur extraordinaire, and now Grazier in residence at AgriProve. Hobbs, absolute pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Grazing Horizons.
Yeah, this is exciting. This is going to be super fun. I love the fact that you and I are going to get to just jam back and forth for a while.
Oh yeah,
we're going to bring the webinar to a whole new level for all the people enjoying this conversation. Yeah, it's super fun. Clearly, I'm going to have to add to my LinkedIn headline after all of that.
Well, did I miss anything out?
No, I don't. I don't think so. I do think that the number of generations does keep growing as time goes on. But my people did come from England in the 1670s. So I imagine that they one or two of them had pushed a cow around during that time. So I think we're probably underselling it a little bit, actually.
Well, let's start there. Let's start with that legacy of generational ranching, and also bringing in your book. This is the book, Hobbs Magaret, Herd, The Animals That Gave Rise to Humanity and Why We Need Them More Than Ever. So you were effectively born a rancher, but in your book you describe yourself as being reborn as a naturalist.
Yes.
And maybe in the end, looking forward, simply becoming a rancher again. Tell us about your upbringing as a rancher in the panhandle of Texas. What did you learn? What changed in how you saw the land? And if you could drop in some stories around horses as you answer, that would be great as well.
Sure. Well, starting with horses, obviously the American West, all you have to do is put a little bit of Yellowstone on, and you realize that the religion of American ranching is based around the horse and not necessarily around the cow or the ecology, although that is certainly changing. So in my house and every rancher's house growing up, you have the paintings of the horse, you have the art of the horse, you have bridles hanging on the wall. Everybody's talking about their best horse. You go to the rodeos. So
and you rode rodeo, right?
yes, I did. There's the binging here. I'm trying to make stop, but I don't know how to do it. So maybe Daniel can take a look at that. Daniel, our producer extraordinaire, is going to solve all of our problems. But I never did a whole lot of association bronc riding, which is the popular bronc riding that you see On TV, I did ranch bronc riding, which is you have to use a regular saddle and you get to hold on with your additional hand, but it's sort of more connected to the history of the place. But my granddad was my biggest hero growing up. John Hobbs, that's where I got my name, is my mother's maiden name. Super cool guy. Lived a hard life. His dad, Robert Hobbs, my great grandfather, shot at him with a shotgun when he was 13. So he had to sleep in the barrel with the dogs for a few nights. And after that, he ran off and joined a ranch on the other side of Vega, Texas. And that was sort of the beginning of that side. The other side had been ranching for a long time. But so I grew up is just sort of in that culture. My first images are seeing my granddad, walk in the door at the end of the day and the sound of his spurs on the wood floor, so all about the horse, and grew up in that environment where it's just cows really were a function of where you get to play with your horse, and that made sense because the ecology was still an infinite background in people's mind. And sadly, we didn't have the data or the monitoring to be able to recognize that the landscape was degrading, and it was only degrading at a rate that you could see if you took a snapshot when you were born and then right before you died and then passed on that information. So nobody really recognized, unless you heard a story of people having to change horses at midday 100 years ago because they were so tired at midday of walking through the tall grass. So
and those tall grasses not there anymore.
no, not there anymore. It's a totally different story now.
So then tell me about then that timing in terms of change in landscape. And then I want to bring music into this, because your connection with Australia didn't just start with grazing. It went a bit before then. So talk to me about the music of the landscape, and how you ended up busking in Melbourne.
Oh, yeah. So somewhere around when I was 15 or 16, my granddad, probably as a result of the failing agricultural systems that we all grew up in, said there's no retirement in ranching. And so I took it to mean, I wasn't going to have much money if I were to go into ranching, which is a terrible thing to implant in your children's brains. Do not do it. Figure out something to do that is I'm all for brainwashing. So brainwash your children in a very positive, productive way. So I decided to go to my other talent, which was music, potentially still is, but has been supplanted by my obsession for all things natural resources in the last decade plus. And so during college, I spent most of my time barely getting by in classes and playing as much guitar as possible, got pretty good. And when I graduated college, I came over. I met a guy from Melbourne who ended up being a good friend at a conference, and he said, "Why don't you come over and hang out in Australia for a while?" So I said, "Okay." So I arrived with $500 in my pocket and lived there for a month, busking on the street. Took me an extra week to get started. So turns out you had to have a permit to do that. We Americans.
Welcome to Australia.
Yeah.
Show us your permit for busking.
Yes, exactly. So I did that for a month, and then got home with $5 in my pocket. So I survived, and that was the beginning of my learning how the burn rate on entrepreneurial endeavors started in Melbourne.
Yeah, music is a foundation to entrepreneurialism. Love it.
Yeah. But to answer your question, everything when you get to start learning about music, it all becomes, you start to see the world in musical terms, and you start to see things as harmony. You start to see things as melodies that run through things. You start to think as harmony. You start to see the flow of music of something from the beginning to the end, and so you start to see things a little bit differently. And that I had no idea how much that was going to affect me going forward.
So then bridge us from Hobbs, the busking musician, and because I actually think you did the music too for the Australian Open at some point. So not just busking.
2015.
2015. So
Yes.
if you're tennis fans and you can remember that soundtrack, that's yours truly, Hobbs Magaret, right here. The bridge going from Hobbs the busker to then Hobbs the ecologically adaptive grazier, and you chronicled much of that work online. I don't know. You've got hundreds of thousands of followers, And maybe talk us through just like how many, so the bridge, and then like how much content have you actually pumped out there?
Oh yeah, so the bridge was really interesting. Yeah, I was working as a musician and a composer for much of my 20s. It was scraping by as musicians and composers do in their 20s, and then my wife and I we got we got pregnant. We got evicted, and we found out we were pregnant all in the same week. Turns out the studio that I was living in, which had an apartment above it, was not zoned for occupancy. So as soon as the county found out, once again, I filled out the correct forms, and then the county found out I was cheating. So, and I didn't even know I was doing it. But so then we went to Los Angeles to try to make it where the musicians go and the composers go. And after a year of being stuck in traffic, I was like, hell with this. I'm not going to do this anymore. So I decided to go back into the only thing that I knew, and my sort of what I was genetically tuned to, genetically adapted to for generations and generations, and get into ranching. And so I started applying to all these ranches all across the country. And in my time out of the industry, this first little seedlings of regenerative agriculture had started to come to the surface where you could find them. They'd been around since the 80s, but almost nobody knew about them. My culture certainly didn't. And so I started learning about everybody's book, everybody's person, everybody's guru, everybody's way of thinking, and so I just sort of consumed this. It was just so perfectly aligned with my mental framework that I was just consuming it. And then I found Johann Zeitzman, and when I found his book Man, Cattle, and Felt, it was all over from there. And there were no jobs out there for ultra high density grazing, so I said, well, I'm gonna have to start my own thing. And so then I started in 2017 doing my own ultra high density grazing, which was totally opposite, totally different from any type of ranching I'd ever done before. Big pasture, gather them up, move them maybe once every month, every couple of months. And if you it's essentially that's hunter gatherer activity. And I was moving into full on management activity. So I learned a lot in those first few years. And 2 years into it, COVID hit. And so while so much of the planet was sadly stuck inside, I was still outside every day moving cattle.
So you were doing that by like manually, like in terms of moving cattle. So
Yeah, building fences. I walked the equivalent of Sydney to Perth and back in 6 years, building electric fences.
Uh,
And during 2020, when everybody was in their houses, sadly, on their phones, so I took advantage of that and started making TikTok videos, and it just sort of screamed from there. And I've made, I don't know, 22,000 videos probably on TikTok over the last couple of years. I haven't been doing it as much, but so I'm up to 250,000 followers on TikTok, 50,000 on Instagram, and that's been a huge boon for me. Interestingly enough, when I was in Los Angeles meeting with a bunch of composers, all the young composers said, well, I made my career on Facebook, and I couldn't stomach that because I just didn't think I wanted to be I didn't want social media to be the foundation of my music career, which tells me that it wasn't for me, because social media then became the foundation of my grazing career.
So walking all those miles in your lingua franca, kilometers for us Australians, that gave you obviously plenty of time to think about the principles and the concepts behind your book, Herd.
Yep.
So then maybe just to lay out a bit of like the format for today and what we want to do in the next 4 episodes of Grazing Horizons. Really, we're going to give you the opportunity to kind of like set the stage in terms of that thinking, the foundations and the concepts behind your approach to cattle, your approach to grazing, your approach to carbon. So we're going to do that at that high level, and then over the next following 4 episodes, we're going to dive deep into a whole bunch of that detail. So if it's all right with you, Hobbs, I'll hand over. We'll go to what's more recognizable webinar part. So you've got a few collective slides to kind of like bring together all of those thoughts and thinking on your walk to Perth and back, interspersed by lots of moving electric fences. And how many times have you shocked yourself too, just by the by?
Hundreds. Yeah, that's probably at. I'm still thinking about the connection between brain damage and nervous system damage and innovative thinking. Maybe
We'll leave that for episode 6. But let's check in so with our producer that we're good to go on the presentation. As we getting some good feedback for the AgriProve studio tweaks that we'll be making. There we go. All right. So Hobbs, over to you. And please post any questions in the chat using the chat function. But I might also just jump in now and then too, just in terms of drilling in on some of those points.
Yeah, 100%. And I hope that you'll jump in far more often than people would expect, because I think there's so much value that comes out of our conversations that do occasionally involve a little bit of wine. So, but totally.
For the record, there's no day drinking going on here.
No, totally sober right now though. So very good. So I guess I just want to start by saying that you better have something useful in this day and age if you're going to say something about regenerative agriculture. If you're going to say cattle are a tool to fix the land, like, okay, cool. Like that's been covered for 40, 50 years. So hopefully today I'm going to lean into one of my favorite catchphrases, which we all remember probably from the TikTok meme days, which is say the weird thing. Okay. So my book was written in an effort to examine all the assumptions about what we're doing and just dig right down to the bottom and then try to examine maybe there's some weird things that are coming out. So here we go. What is a cow for? I think that's a pretty fundamental question, right? Yeah. You know, it's and every kindergartner knows what a cow is for, and then we start to stack on all of these assumptions afterwards that really screws us up, you know, because this is a fundamental question now that we need to think about, because things are not working out too well overall in agriculture. We have rising costs, degrading land, fragile systems. As it says, the conventional ranching model is breaking down, and I know that firmly, having grown up seeing everything, knowing it's not right, and then coming across particularly Alan Savory's work and realizing, oh, that's what the hell is going on. Every degraded ranch I've ever seen makes sense now, because it was not operating according to the blueprint of reality, which everybody who is in this Podinar knows. So in order to address these issues, we have to start at the very beginning, the fundamental beginning. And we start at the very beginning of my book, which is what is the very fundamental? The world exists. That's the fundamental place that we start in the book, because the most fundamental thing that I can think of is that the world exists, and that's actually a pretty radical thing to think, because most people exist heuristically throughout their day. They just think this. We just think sort of things unconsciously, and I think there's a lot of that going on in agriculture. So, what we're going to do is we're going to examine what is a cow for, and we're going to start at the very beginning. In the ancient savanna. This is actually the connection. This is, I think, what brought you and me together in the beginning, Matthew. It's just our conversation about the savanna, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So for millions of years, and the savanna is a cradle of humanity. This is there's a library of literature out there showing that savanna is the cradle of humanity. So for millions of years, migrating herds. 50 million years ago, grass came online, and just shortly thereafter, the first proto-ruminants came online. So the technology of grass arose, and then the technology to cycle the grass arose. Migrating animals were a bit further down the line, but pretty soon the earth told us we needed grass, and then the earth told us we needed a way to cycle the grass. So we created, Mother Nature created herds. They maintained the health and the function of savanna's grassland forest mosaic. And this uniquely stable and productive ecosystem provided the conditions for early humans to thrive. Starting about 2.5 million years ago, the human brain was a third the size that it is now. And in that 2.5 million years from there to now, our brain has almost tripled in size. And during that period, we didn't invent any new tools. I mean, you can argue what new tools would be. We definitely had some advancements in how we were sharpening rocks and sticks, but there was the internet was a ways off. So what that tells us is that the ecology was so rich and so abundant for the vast majority of that the human brain just continued cranking.
We could get by on a third of our cognitive capacity.
Yeah, and
I've been accused of having far less cognitive capacity and trying to get by on that, but that's effectively what you're saying.
well, if
There was surplus around.
there was surplus around, and we took that surplus and turned it into bigger brains. And so the savanna created the human brain in a very real sense. And what we're going to explore here in a little bit is that biological development laid the foundation for all of human culture, because you have to have a bigger brain to create culture, which then creates a bigger brain. So the humanity is, in essence, a derivative of herd activity. So this is why I called the book "The Animals That Gave Rise to Humanity and Why We Need Them More Than Ever," because the story is not over. The story is not over with the herd animals. It's just beginning. They have the technology we don't. Oh, isn't it amazing what AI can do? No, it's 2 years ago. There's no way I would be able to put what is in my brain right here. You wanted to say something?
No, it's just we'll get to it. But picking up on that point on savannas, since I first met you, everywhere you see now is you see savanna, and you see our innate celebration of savanna. And it's a beautiful representation of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just it's the late evening. You have the sun coming through the leaves, and that feeling, you can imagine seeing this through millions of years and experiencing this through millions of years as you're starting to bed down for the night, getting ready for some rest, a little love making, just good stuff is coming. So
we have to have a rating on this pod.
Love, yeah. You can see how that would be so ingrained in us that we would recreate it in our most spiritual places, and if you go into any cathedral, St. Mary's Cathedral in Sydney is just an unbelievably great example of, it's like you're in a savanna. It's a savanna. You have stained glass windows everywhere, which is a recreation of the sun coming through the leaves at dusk or at dawn, and you're there, you're connected with everything around you. That oneness of all reality is at hand in that sense.
And from a practical level, what I love with the picture on the left is what you don't see, but you don't see because you've got the ability to see it if they were there, and that's the tigers, like the predators, who would do you harm. So it's also that ability to be at peace, because now you've actually got visibility. So we're no longer huddling in the jungle in the dark of we've got that line of sight, and we know when to be on alert, and we know when we can actually down regulate and relax.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And it really started to make sense to me as soon as I would see my wife totally freak out at our kids running into tall grass. I'm like, oh, that's some ancient programming that comes from somewhere, which explains why human beings and all of our cultural and athletic and musical endeavors take place on mowed grass, on freshly grazed lawns. It's not that balls bounce better on grass, on shortly mowed grass. It's that we use balls because that is the balls didn't create the games. Herds created the condition to use balls. Herds created the condition for us to go out there and know that, oh, okay. And so we created games, we created music. Games are a great example because you have this you have competition, but it's bounded within greater cooperation. Everybody agrees on the rules, and you come out and you play by the rules. You have people refereeing, and you have a good time, and you compete, and everybody excels and gets better. And that's why games are such a great example of human civilization writ large. And that's, once again, an extension of the herd activity on the animals.
Just back in the day, the herds maintained our playing surfaces, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Without that herds, there was no ability. You couldn't even comprehend playing games because there was just no space to do that.
That's right. And if you didn't have the herds, you have what we have on a lot of the planet today, which is grass that just grows and grows and grows, becomes more abundant, then dies, and then burns.
So
So,
the byline for your book could have been "Herd making balls bounce better,"
yep, that's
which
right.
ties into the tennis open. And because this is the G-rated version, we'll keep it right there. We won't dive any further onto that.
That's right, and would have been really great plosive alliteration there as well. Balls bouncing better. Incredible, Matthew. Okay, so one other really interesting element of this whole thing is that any indigenous civilization that you really start to dig into, and I haven't dug into all of them, but I've dug into enough to know that it's pretty amazing how often the creation myth has herd animals playing a part. Um, the Blackfoot buffalo, the story I write about in my book is the Indian princess marries the bison, and then the bison, and then the bison kills her dad. She brings her dad back to life, and then now in return they're basically they the humans will bring the bison back to life every uh, after every hunt. So you kill them and then you do the dance and it brings them back to life. So the intertwining of humanity and the and herd animals just written right into that. Uh, and then there's the Nordic foundation story of Audumla, which was the cosmic cow that basically gave birth to giants, and all beings came from her, um, in a sense, and she gives sustenance to all things. And one of my favorite paintings out there is actually Audumla the cow. And then Siberian reindeer. The story is basically a Siberian princess. The first humans lived in heaven, and then uh, uh, the young lady was supposed to marry an old decrepit guy in heaven, and she said no and married the young strapping man, which is renewal and um, everything moving forward in time. But then she got kicked out of heaven, and she was sent down on a reindeer, and then the reindeer basically sacrificed itself to create the land. So she rode down from heaven to earth on a reindeer, and it was just basically void. And the reindeer said, "You have to kill me because then that will create the land." So effectively, it was. I mean, it's pretty much spelled out in black and white there, right? The animal was sacrificed to create the land. Pretty amazing. So you see this in a lot, and in my book I talk about it in a bit more detail. Um, so what we'll get to here is the fact that there are pretty intense. Let's think about it this way. It's easy to say that we are living in an irrational manner right now, but we arrive at an irrational place. Everything good? We arrive at an irrational place through a series of small, sequential, rational decisions. So this paradigm that we're discussing, this ancient blueprint, got short-circuited about 100 years ago, uh, because it was a good idea, it seemed at the time, because the ecology was an infinite background to take fossil fuels and create fertilizer, which has been an amazing thing, and it has helped the humanity increase its population by about 6 times or more, 6, 7 times. It's fantastic. And so this is systemic critique. This is not any critique at any individual people over time for things that they do. This is a dispassionate systemic critique. My uh, just just to get that in before we move forward. So this is we've created an irrational sort of suboptimal system where we pump the oil, then we grow the monocrops, and then we fatten the cattle in feedlots. And we can get into the containment feeding here in a little bit if we want to discuss that, because that is an interesting new level to it. But cheap energy fueled synthetic fertilizers, irrigation, uh, all of those center pivots, which are an amazing piece of machinery, high energy feeds, you know, they put fat on a cow real fast, and then industrial feedlots, which if you've ever been to the panhandle of Texas, it's there's a lot of industrial feedlots there. It's pretty amazing. And yes, it created a lot of food for people, and it still creates a lot of food for people. But I grew up actually downstream from all of the feedlots in Hereford, Texas, and I believe Hereford, um, that's Deaf Smith County. I believe it has more cattle per acre than anywhere else on the planet, and that could be old data, but anyway, the runoff from those feedlots killed the National Wildlife Refuge that was between the feedlots and where I lived, and that happened in the 70s, which was pretty sad. But so clearly the ecology as an infinite background is going away, and it's not that the ecology is going away, it's the sense that the ecology is an infinite background. That paradigm is starting to fade.
And let's build into that because and provide that sort of the broader context. Because the reason why we're going through this, so part of it is the central contribution in terms of your thinking, but then jumping ahead in terms of where we get to is not less cattle in the landscape, and this is part of the context of why AgriProve is so excited to be having Hobbs as one of our key contributors and inaugural Grazier and Residence. So where we get to applying those first principles is that we actually need more cattle in the landscape, more cattle run better. And actually, if you look at soil oil and carbon, and then that cattle equation, which is the opposite of that ecological deficit, it is that ecological abundance. Where we get to is more cattle. So in a way, this is very much a pathway to a deeper understanding that leads us to a more long-term sustainable cattle industry with high levels of productivity and high levels of profitability. So that's the broader part. And I would encourage everyone to put their thoughts into the chat. Even if people are struggling in terms of necessarily seeing that connection, the connection is real and important. But so anyway, we go on. We've got that large brain. We've got that ability to manipulate the ecology. Hobbs.
Yeah, I mean, and that goes right back to the question that I'll kick back to people. Just continue asking. So, what is a cow for? And if you were to look at the way we use them now, what would an alien think that they're for? Are we really clear on that? And we'll get to that in just a moment. So, here, one of my favorite ways to conceptualize this is the disasters around the 737 Max, which we all remember. There was a crash in Ethiopia, a crash in Indonesia, that in rapid succession, these two Boeing 737s went down, and we're like, what the hell's going on here? Well, it turns out the 737, which was designed in the 60s and was just a total cash cow, no pun intended, was instead they kept making it more fuel efficient, bigger engines. And then I believe is the A320 Neo came out, and Boeing said, oh crap, well, we need to compete with these guys. And so once again, they adjusted the engines, they adjusted the wings, but the original airframe was still the same. And so what ends up happening is, instead of reframing and redesigning the system from the ground up, you just take small steps, and you eventually end up with an unstable system. And so eventually what you have to do is rethink the system anyway. And so the reason I bring that up is because we are in danger of slapping sustainability on top of a bunch of assumptions that actually don't fit with the blueprint of ecology. And it still goes back to, what is a cow for? What is a cow for? And so in an effort to make sure that we're building an edifice that can support our future endeavors, we have to make sure the foundation is right. What is a cow for? And we have to rethink the airframe. We have to commit to the first principles approach, because otherwise we're thinking by analogy, which is this is the way it's been done, or you're thinking not deeply enough to your earliest assumptions. And so the whole idea is just aligning our activities with the blueprint of nature. It's our trying to figure out what that blueprint of nature is as effectively as possible, then aligning our activities with it. Because if nature wanted feedlots, it would have created feedlots. Um, and if nature wanted giant framey cows, she would have created giant framey cows. But those don't really exist. And a hippo would have a lot different shape if large frame inefficient animals was what Mother Nature wanted.
All right. And now we're at the half time mark. So we get to do a word from our sponsor.
And speaking of figuring out how the blueprint of nature works,
Yes, Sarah's tag. So Grazing Horizons brought to you by AgriProve. AgriProve, we're in the business of making your soil carbon bankable with carbon credits delivered by better management. Now, we have a marketplace of innovative products to help build better outcomes. One of our marketplace partners is Sarah's Tag. And Sarah's Tag is the world's first animal health intelligence platform delivering constant tracking of animal welfare, location, and behavior via satellite ear tag. With Sarah's Tag, knowledge is power and profit. And on Monday, 2nd February, Sarah's Tag has a major launch of their new Gen 6 tag with improved functionality and performance. It's going to be online at the AgriProve Marketplace, so get in touch with our team if you'd like to learn more. Now, Ops, back to you.
excellent. So where do we go from here? Yeah, I love AI so much. You can stick a woolly mammoth in a feedlot and just sort of paint the picture, you know. So this is where we're going to get really into what is a cow for. And this is actually an area where I disagree with my mentors, the people who have taught me pretty much everything that I know, and who very well could be right and I could be wrong, but this is my take on it. So the big one is that cattle have a dual purpose. The first one is to provide protein, to turn grass into protein. The second one is to maintain and improve ecosystem function. Now, after much deliberation on that, I came to the conclusion that the first one actually doesn't exist. And it's because that's the way of the life cycle works. Every single being on the planet dies and feeds another being. So why would we manage something or even conceptualize something based on the traits that it shares with every single other living being? We have to manage and conceptualize and integrate things based on the specialty that they provide for the system. And the specialty that cattle provide for the ecological system is eating grass, is cycling forage. And individually, they cycle grass. That's what they do individually. And as a group, they maintain and improve ecosystem function. The point of a herd, the central thesis of my book is that herds exist. One of the theses which is shared with others is that herds exist to improve and maintain ecosystem function. That's why they exist. And so another way to say that, which might be more interesting, is that I conceptualize beef as a waste product. It's a delicious waste product. It's totally monetizable waste product, and it's totally right to think of it as a byproduct. But I think of it as a waste product because it helps me root out any leftover assumptions that might still be in my mind that subconsciously encourage me to make decisions around management that have the meat outcome in mind. At no point throughout the entire history of the ecology have you didn't see an indigenous person in North America roll up with an ultrasound machine to a bison and go, oh, this one needs more ribeye fat on it.
And I think this is probably the central paradox that your book talks to, Hobbs, because you might start be thinking that, well, if we start thinking about like beef as the secondary function, we're just concentrating on their ecological contribution, that's going to be a downturn in the herd, that we're actually going to create less beef. But you actually argue the opposite, that if you take this approach with protein as a secondary driver, a secondary proposition, we end up with more beef.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because when you're in line with a system, you have less friction in the system. There's, I mean, the example. This is why capitalism works and socialism doesn't work, because socialism and communism has to devote so much resources to enforcement that there's less resource available for alignment and growth. So in a system that's voluntary, which is what the ecology evolved as, a voluntary system, everything flows so much more. There are more information pathways. There's less friction through the entire system. You end up with far more beef. You start selecting animals for their ability to perform ecological workload. It turns out that those characteristics are what creates really fantastic beef.
So you're not only going to get more beef, but you're saying better quality beef.
Yeah, better quality grass finished beef. I mean, there are people out there who are always going to prefer the taste and the texture of grain finished beef. I'm not one of those people. I also recognize that the literature that's been coming out in the last 5 years around grass finished beef is unequivocally better for you, and obviously that's what human beings evolved eating, was grass finished protein. So that's not all. I mean, obviously, it's not grass finished if you're eating fish, yes, but ruminant animals, herbivores, it's all grass finished. That's aligning yourself with the system, and we'll get to this through the genetics section, but and I'm having some evolution in my thinking around this. For such a long time, my um, my thinking was defined so much by the Zeitsmans of the world, and was based so much around fertility. The characteristics that really increase fertility create a better beef product. And now I'm beginning to think about it, and we'll get into this more deeply in terms of selecting and breeding for ability to perform ecological workload. And fertility is the best proxy we have for that.
So well, cool. Let's keep on rolling through because we've still got a bit of material to get to.
Yeah. So it's this. We'll get into this in 2 and 3, but we need to look at genetics and we look at grazing, because those are the two key levers we can actually pull. Genetics is around building inherent fertility, which we'll talk about hormonal balance. We'll talk about fat as insurance, and we'll talk about how that cycles positively on itself. But this is about building inherent fertility. But as I said, I'm really beginning to think about this in terms of ecological workload. And then obviously grazing management, migration, density, and recovery. And I specifically put some marsupials on the right side because the blueprint of grazing, which we will get to in section 3, is that you have two types of digestive systems, the hindgut fermenter and the ruminant, moving together in a migratory fashion to create well maintained and improving landscapes. And you even had that in Australia with the giant kangaroos and the giant wombat, which was up to 2,000 kilograms and was migratory. So the blueprint was already there. It's you had different animals in Australia, but the overall formula is still in place.
And just a quick one, because we're getting some feedback that some of the slides are blurry. So we will send out this slide pack to everyone who's on the live Podinar. And if you're listening to this in post, just to send an email to team@agriprove.io, and we'll get you a copy of the slides.
Beautiful. Yeah, and then so once we get into the grazing, obviously, we're going to talk about how there are no prescriptions, there are just principles, and how you use those is up to you. We'll get into the metrics that actually matter. We'll start thinking about first principles versus conventional metrics a little bit more deeply. We'll talk about the ecological payoff that comes out from all of those. Everybody knows these, but they're worth exploring. It's lower inputs, earlier calving, drought resilience, and higher stocking rates, and how that comes out of treating the cow based on what she is designed to do. And obviously this compounds over time. We will examine that a little bit more deeply in the grazing section. But so when we start managing cattle as biological infrastructure, ecological partners, I like biological infrastructure better.
Biological infrastructure.
I think that's good. I think then the balance sheet really starts to improve. So let's get into it.
But maybe just can you wind back one slide? because they're compounding over time. Because we've focused a lot above ground in terms of herd, and then managing better for effectively more beef, better ecological function. So what happens to soil function generally, and soil carbon in particular, in that with that ecological direction?
Well, the great thing coming into this fellowship here at AgriProve, I knew there were going to be new insights coming out of it, new ways to frame things, new ways to characterize things, and the work that we've done, particularly Matthew and I, around or just discussing these things, has led us to the understanding that no one can capture carbon. It's not possible. What farmers and ranchers and station managers and pastoralists can do is they can capture sunlight and they can capture water. And the only way to do that is through your management. So what we're beginning to see is that cattle management of livestock, which everybody knows, drives soil function by optimizing your solar panels. And so much talk has gone.
And your solar panels being the leaf area on your forage.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And the leaf area being the most palatable part of the forage as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The most palatable part, the most photosynthetically sensitive area. And so we've talked so much about in the regenerative community about your soil as a sponge. Like you want it to hold more water, but it's actually more correctly, I think, conceptualized as a battery, because it's a battery that holds water, because you have an optimized leaf solar panel, which pulls carbon out of the ground and creates photosynthates, which I just learned this word the other hour from Matthew, which I'm very excited about, because a photosynthate is actually almost a more interesting way to think about it than root exudates, because we're all eating sun. That's and the only way for that to happen is through plants. So you harness this energy, and then if there's excess left over because your plants are happy and they're fat and they're doing well, then it puts it into the soil where it's stored there. It's stored in the molecules, the carbon-based molecules, and because carbon is the most social of all of the elements.
Yeah.
It's the one that helps us store the most energy in those bonds. And so it's a battery, and increasing organic matter in your soil is building a bigger battery.
And it's interesting looking at through the energy lens, because a lot of the questioning around soil carbon relates to climate, but more specifically rainfall. And this is this concept that, oh, well, if it just rains, your soil carbon increases. And we've focused around management as a tool to drive effective rainfall. It's not the rain that falls on your land. It's the amount that it goes into the soil, and it's the amount that is held in the soil. And management's the only key determining factor in terms of effective rainfall. So what you actually capture. So that sort of tracks nicely to management, but I haven't heard discussed a lot about this concept in terms of what we're actually managing sunlight. We're actually managing solar energy, and like a grazing enterprise is as much about like renewable energy, like managing that solar energy, and management and how management impacts your ability to support a system that's maximizing photosynthate production, which is a very technical fancy way of saying above ground forage and below ground healthy biologically active soils. How do you respond to that concept of like managing your grazing as for solar energy? Like,
yeah, absolutely, and we'll definitely get into that during the grazing section. But there's a huge difference between a pasture that's 30% leaf and 70% stem, and a pasture that's 80% leaf and 20% stem. I mean, and that goes back to, first principles, thinking about running a business. If you run a business and you have a shit ton of, if you have a lot of money that's going into, and finally getting comfortable in here, you got a lot of money that's going into infrastructure, but not a lot of money that's going into profit generation. You're not going to have a lot of left over to charge your battery, to put into the savings account. Whereas if you have minimal infrastructure and maximum profit generation, you have a lot left over to put into your savings account. And so The question, it's not just how much litter is left. It's not how much plant biomass is left, or how much is present. It's what is the quality of it? How much leaf is there? How much do you have? How many solar panels do you have, and how many steel posts holding up the solar panel do you have?
Yeah. And it really, that almost strikes a chord to bringing back as we start to close out this first episode to the foreword that was written in your book by Dr. Jeff Goodwin, Texas A&M Center for Grazing Lands and Ranch Management. And I quite liked how he framed the book, and that necessary engagement in terms of questioning and like saying, how do we optimize? How do we get better in terms of landscape? But he talked in one of his comments that stuck with me, was that the quiet triumph was when someone aligns management with the land's own operating system. And the real insight is not necessarily knowing, but noticing. And so like, again, that just sort of backs up a lot of that discussion. But it will, because at its core, it is, how do we have these discussions to actually get better outcomes?
Well, there's a well-studied phenomenon that after people go to a magic show and they go outside, they think that something's wrong with them because the sky looks different. And well, it turns out their sense of reality was shifted while they were in there, and then they go outside and suddenly they're noticing things instead of just running on their existing operating system. And that's why I went to such effort to break down what we're doing to the bare bones, to question the most fundamental assumptions that most people maybe aren't questioning, and to give everybody as much courage as possible to question their own assumptions, like what unquestioned assumptions, or you might call them transparent beliefs, do I have about reality that are influencing the way I do things without even knowing it. That's life's great opportunity and great reward, is to notice that you've been doing something unconsciously. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, that was his whole work. He said if you don't, you have to make the unconscious conscious, or it will run your life and you'll call it destiny. And
I liked how you broke that down specifically in terms of the horse metaphor, where to start a young horse and comparing that to understanding complex systems. But you don't just jump on and ride, but you begin by putting on your boots. So it's like the first principles of horse riding, which is pulling on your boots.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. And so I certainly would just encourage everybody out there to spend as much time as you can questioning your own assumptions. And it's not something you want to spend all your time doing, but it's something that you get a lot of reward for a little bit of effort.
And to then put a plug to, if you're working with AgriProve, or go onto our website, where we've invested heavily into our Horizon platform, which is all about trying to digitize landscapes and soil function to start to provide these metrics and these insights to help that noticing, to be able to backtrack that sort of intuition and start to articulate. So some of these metrics like effective rainfall, effective solar and energy becomes a big one that we're working on too. Like, how do you know if you're doing a good job at converting the amount of solar energy that falls onto your paddocks into forage, into deep root systems, into a healthy functioning soil system, into soil carbon, which you can actually monetize as credits? And a lot of that is in discussion in terms of, well, what are you noticing, and how useful would it be to actually have a metric to kind of like baseline your performance? I then just in summing up for the day, which has been an excellent first discussion. But the role of cattle. So let's come back to that central question in terms of, what is a cow for? Because it has to be more than just the basis of a happy meal.
That's right. Yeah, a cow is for. I would love everybody to just maybe come up with their own answer. Obviously, I gave it in the presentation, but in my view, a cow is for cycling forage. That's what a cow is for. It's for processing forage, turning it into fertilizer, microbial, everything that you get into it. So, if you're explaining it to a 5-year-old, a cow is for eating grass.
Cows for eating grass. And by taking that approach, that means more cows in the landscape.
Yep.
Better healthy functioning ecosystem. And where AgriProve comes in is like more carbon credits, because that is the basis as to how you get more carbon into the system, which is fundamentally aligned to long-term sustainability, overall productivity, and increasing profitability.
Yeah, and I think that you might have to add sovereignty to that at some point, because that's actually your biggest lever to maintain your sovereignty on the planet, is because we all exist on top of this framework of ecology.
Yeah, and so no tension between grazing and ecology. It's just a virtuous cycle.
No, well, this is a grazing planet. Actually, I probably should have named the book "The Grazing Planet," which maybe that'll be my second book.
It's the sequel, The Grazing Planet. Awesome. So thank you, everyone. At AgriProve, we believe soil is the operating system of agriculture, and carbon is its emerging currency. Conversations like this help us move beyond just data to better understand the stories, systems, and decisions that lie beneath our feet, the ones that ultimately determine our collective sustainability, productivity, and profitability. This has been Grazing Horizons and AgriProve Podinar. I'd like to thank our production team, Daniel Wortman, our inaugural guest, Hobbs Magaret. My name is Matthew Warnken, and Horizon is only the beginning. And if this is on the podcast where you're listening to, please hit like and subscribe. And thank you and bye for now.